everyone. Welcome to the Black Knowledge Society's meeting following our fourth edition Representation, Meaning Making and Manufacturing Consent. I am Sherelle.
And I'm Esther.
And we are joined by our team, Rudy, Aletha, and Kyra.
Hello.
And today we are joined by two guest panelists. So please welcome Professor Les Henry. William Les Henry is a professor of criminology and sociology in the School of Human and Social Sciences at University of West London. His areas of expertise are criminology, sociology, anthropology, race, education, ethnicity, youth crime, and cultural studies. In addition to his academic career, Professor Henry is a reggae DJ, a writer, poet, and a community activist who has been interviewed extensively for television and radio. We also have Dr. Ladi Fagbola. Dr. Ladi is a lecturer of Nottingham Trent University and a digital advertising account manager with an FMCG brokerage agency. As part of his academic inquiry, Ladi is currently exploring the intersections of Black radicalism and anarchism, a people-led political movement without kings, lords, or slaves. A political vision that exceeds taking over the master's tools by building parallel ways of living and being until the global Black community can completely exit the current capitalist world order. And so, thank you everyone for joining us today. Before we commence, I'd just like to go over some house rules. If you do have any questions, please raise a hand in the chat tools or type a question in the chat box. Questions will be answered in the Q&A section. So I'll hand over to my colleague, Esther.
Lovely, thanks, Sherelle. And a warm welcome to everyone once again. Thank you all for joining us. And we're really delighted actually to have as many as we have given the time of year. Very, very quickly, I just wanted to refer to this edition. So many of you may know that the Black Knowledge Society is foremostly a periodical, and this particular edition, Representation, Meaning Making and Manufacturing Consent, is actually dedicated to a very, very key personality in my academic career, a huge inspiration, and that's Stuart Hall, Professor Stuart Hall. And we like to start our presentations with a quote. And on this occasion, I think it's only fitting that I refer to one of Stuart Hall, the late, great, and eternal Stuart Hall's quotes. And the quote reads, "Those who do not see themselves reflected in national heritage are excluded from it." And I think that's a very, very useful starting point for us to proceed from today. So I'd like to begin with our very first question. And that is directed initially to Professor Les. And we're looking at the examination and the drivers that inform media representations of Black identity. So, Professor Les, I'd like to start by asking you, how do you interpret the relationship between media and society?
Well, greetings everyone, and greetings, brother Dr. Ladi, TBKS. You know, I give thanks for your sterling work, and yeah, also the interview making me sound, I don't know, I'm kind of sound wild, you know, but anyway, to me, the relationship between the media, so you're asking me between the media and society?
Yes.
For me, a really easy way to think about it, let's say we were thinking about it in the context of Marx, and I know loads of people are talking about Marxism and blah, blah, blah. But remember, for Marx, you have an economic base. So whatever the economic base is, the system that comes out of it, he would call it the superstructures. And Stuart Hall is wonderful for that. because one of the papers that Stuart Hall wrote about was that Marx analysis of the base and superstructure as a metaphor was never completed. I don't know if you've ever come across that. I read it when I was at Goldsmiths, or tried to. But the fact is, whatever comes out of the economic base, that system of ideas will dominate the society. So if the media is controlled by, let's say white racists, white supremacists, people who see Africans as the antithesis of what the European is, then the ideas that are going to be promulgated through that organ are going to represent that. And for me, it's really as simple as that. What is beautiful about this time, and maybe even this COVID moment, is we've seen so many ways to disrupt that relationship, just like what we're doing now. If you think about it, a year ago, we probably wouldn't have even thought about doing something like this, where we can have, you know, brothers and sisters or people who are into the human struggles for equity, because I'm about an equitable society. What the media represents is inequity, because it's not in their interest to promote balance or harmony. So, you know, and for me, one of the interesting things about that is if I'm working with my students and I'll say to them, right, here's an article that was in the Sun, and here's an article that was in the Times, let's say. And they will naturally give the one in the Times more credence than they won the one in the Sun. And then what I say to them is, what you have to understand is take away all the fancy language, the verbosity that might be in the Times, and look at what they are actually saying. So let's say we take a story about, I don't know, so-called black on black crime, and we look at it. Strip away all the fancy language and they're saying exactly the same thing. But even more importantly, and I explain this to my students, the person who is the editor of the Times could tomorrow be the editor of the Sun. And the person who's the editor of the Sun could tomorrow be the editor of the Times. A game is being played. So to me, if we're going to talk about how, as you know, peoples of African ancestry, because that's what we're talking about now, Black people, how we represented in the mainstream media, it is exactly the same way as we're represented in the wider society. You know, we're generally reduced to the physical and not cerebral. You know, and it's one of the things that I said in the wonderful interview I did with Sister Esther. That for me is one of the major concerns. And if we want to, you know, just to kind of sum that up, if we want to think about that relationship historically, you know, it's not coincidental that as peoples of African ancestry, we dominate certain outlets. So sports, entertainment, singing, dancing, blah, blah, blah. Because that's what we were forced into being when we were enslaved. Those of us who were the wonderful inventors who couldn't patent their own inventions were hidden. So whoever dominated the mainstream, they promoted and presented those notions of what we could be as Africans. So therefore, when I was at school, it wasn't surprising to me that all they ever encouraged me to do was athletics, football, or anything that wasn't cerebral. Yet, as I said before, myself and my twin brother were always amongst the highest achievers. So the media relationship will always reflect the dominant society. Well, this is the mainstream media we're talking about, because now we have alternative outlets like this. So I hope that kind of frames it.
Absolutely. That's brilliant. I think that's a great starting point. Thank you for that, Prof. Dr. Ladi, I'd like to move on to you. Should you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say thanks for this event. I was so happy to be invited on, very privileged, and even more privileged to be sharing a stage with Professor Henry here. And please refer to me as Ladi. In terms of the actual question itself, actually, thank you to everyone else who is taking time out of their day to attend this. We know this is a big ask. Many people will be leaving their family to be on here now. So thank you so much for your time and your concentration and participation. For the question itself, yeah, very similar to what Prof said, and the way I sort of see that, and just playing it with more flowery words, is that the media is the propaganda arm of the ruling elite's violence. Because one thing we don't appreciate enough is that this is a violent system. If it's not killing actively, it is killing subvertively, in poverty and all the other structural systems it uses to bury people. So what the way I understand the media is the propaganda arm of that violent system. It's the one that is convincing us to wait one more day. It's the one that's trying to pacify us or distract us, or trying to reinforce that actually this violence is normal. There's nothing bad happening here. There's nothing to see here. So they sort of go hand in hand, in the sense that for this violence to be sustained over a long period of time, you need a propaganda machine. And sorry to our religious folks here. So 200-300 years ago, it was more religion that was playing that role actively. But we've moved on a little bit, and we're seeing mainstream media increasingly replacing what religion would have been used to pacify the masses. And like, yes, they're stepping on your necks now, but your reward is in heaven. But right now, even worse than that, we're saying actually don't even look at the neck, don't even talk about reward on earth or in heaven. Just watch Netflix. And I have a Netflix account, by the way, so I'm in this boat as well. But don't even focus on the neck. Do your job. You hate it, but once you come home, consume as much media as you can to sort of ease the pain and ease the the demeaning labor we go through, the harassment and racism and all the horrible things we experience on a daily basis. The media is just there to pacify us and also reinforce that violence that we're experiencing, that it's natural. This is the way it has always been. And like you also said, whether it's print, whether it's TV, whether it's news, one of the conversations Esther and I had was around news. It sort of reflected in the paper. So even when they say news, the way they frame the facts, in their mind, they're presenting facts, but the way they frame it, the way they communicate it, who decides which facts get reported, and who decides which facts are omitted. All those tiny decisions add up to perpetuating the violent system we're in. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's it. That's great. Okay, I do want to come back to some of the points that you mentioned. So I would like to revisit some of the points that you mentioned, but it will come later on in our discussion. I think also important to set out from our point of view in terms of our position is that this is not designed to be a talking shop. We're not here to kind of just, I suppose, sort of pat ourselves on the back or, lament over a lot of the issues. Our aim, our focus here is very much about moving forward, about progress, about solutions, and really about opening up how we move from where we are to points of action. Activism ultimately is what we're talking about. And again, we will come to that a bit later on. So very, very interesting and valid points. And I thank you both for that. So I'd like to move on to the next question. Still within the same section. Professor Les, in your interview that you gave, you made a very, very profound point. And that point was that you would prefer no representation than misrepresentation. And that was actually one of the quotes that we shared on our social media. And there was a lot of response and engagement with that. So I'm quite interested if, for the benefit of those who are on this platform who may not have come across the interview yet or the social media post, what you meant by that.
Right. So firstly, even that quote, and it kind of goes back to something I shared off air, that I don't really listen to my interviews or watch my TV interviews when I've written something and published it. I generally don't go back. I'm always kind of just looking forwards in that sense. And it was I think it was either 2002 or 2003. I did a talk for 100 Black Men, and it was Brother Tony Warner hosted me at the time. And I think it was at Goldsmiths College. And basically I did a talk on how Black music became urban So I looked at how did black music become collapsed into this category called urban, okay? And what I basically did in it was I looked at songs like Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones, Brown Sugar, which I'm not sure if people are really aware of, but that song is actually about a slave master beating enslaved Africans and raping them off in the night. That's what it's about. You can look at the lyrics. And during the Q&A, somebody asked me a question about, you know, what do you think overall about representation? And I said, look, think about it in this way. Let's say you read a novel, get a famous novel, I don't know, Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart, let's say. You read it. Because it's written, you have to imagine and visualize the characters, yes or no? Now, if you read a graphic novel of the same thing, that aspect is taken away from you, isn't it? So that's what I mean by no representation is better than misrepresentation. So rather than having all these coons and these buffoons representing us as Africans on the TV, I would rather not see any of them. And then at least, not just us, but those people who are our enemies, because they are the enemies, people who hate us for being black or African just for the fact that that's what we are absolutely our enemy. And some of them look like us. So the point that I'm making is quite a simple one. Don't keep giving them ammunition, because every time they see these misrepresentations, they become the representation of us. So we are always measured against those representations, whether we like it or not. The reason why I remembered that quote is because a wonderful sister of mine, Zainab Mahmood, who lives in Canada now, Somali sister, she sent me an email once and she closed it with that quote, no representation is better than misrepresentation. And she said, who said that? And I said to her, do you know what, sis, I don't know, but it sounds like me. And she said, it was you. And then she reminded me of where I said it. But the point that I'm making is, and I am very adamant about this. As an African person, I would rather not see a black face on mainstream TV than these constant misrepresentations, because then we always have to fight against those, whether we like it or not. Remember, the process of identification is not down to the individual, not in a society like this that is inherently racist, classist, sexist, and all these other ways that will divide us as members of the human family. The way how identification works is like this. This is Les. He's got locks. He's got a beard. He is of Jamaican ancestry. He is of African ancestry. But the Jamaican bit becomes significant because Rastafari manifested out of Jamaica. What do Rastafari generally do? Smoke weed. So you look at Les and you would say, Les is Rasta, therefore Les smokes weed. And if you only get that on TV, that this is what Rastafari is, forget about all the other wonderful stuff that Rastafari has done, you will get reduced to that. That's the same kind of thing what happens to Bob Marley. Oh, one love, one heart, ganja smoking, Rasta guy was quite short, so he wore, I don't know, platform shoes to be taller and blah, blah, blah. But they don't tell you, Bob Marley, I feel like bombing a church now that I know the preacher is lying. They don't tell you, Bob Marley, the system is a vampire sucking the blood of African people. Do you understand what I'm saying? So to me, I would rather not have that representation than we are constantly being misrepresented. And the crucial point is, and my final point on this is, if there was a balance, so let's say you saw some of these, I don't know, blackface people acting like the typical zip coon, buffoon, you know, half idiot, as we say in Jamaica. But then you flick the channel and you get balance, it wouldn't be a problem, would it? But we don't get the balance. And this is where, if you look at how, you know, white society organizes things, they will ridicule themselves because they know that for every time they ridicule themselves, there are 7 positive cerebral representations of them and you literally switch the channels. As Africans, we don't have that. And that's why I say, for me, no representation is better than misrepresentation. But what I do want to add to this is, I don't condemn my brothers and sisters who so-called sell out. I don't condemn them, because someone said to me recently, Lenny Henry's a sellout. And I said, when did Lenny Henry buy in? Because to be a sellout, you have to buy in.
True.
And I think sometimes we need to be very careful about how we frame these arguments. But as I said, for me, no representation is better than misrepresentation. I'd rather use my imagination.
Yeah.
You know, when I went to Ghana in 1996, I could have been in Jamaica, where my people come from, where they have red dirt. I actually said to some of my family in Jamaica once, and I'll close very quickly here about the representation. Some of my family from Jamaica, up Clarendon, and people who know Jamaica, that's up country. And where we come from, like where my uncle them live, you need like a goat or a mule to drag you up there, because you can't even drive up to some of them places, literally. But if I said to them, I'm going to have a meeting tomorrow for Africans, probably 70% of my family wouldn't attend. But if I said I'm having a meeting for Black people, all of them will come. Because the representations that they have been fed of Africans makes them actually believe, many of them, that they're not African. And I said to them, if I take you to, I don't know, Kano in Nigeria, or I don't know, Abuja, places where I've been, you know, or Accra in Ghana, or other places, and I drop you in there, you'll never find yourself again. Because everybody you see looks like you. But it's those total misrepresentations that we get. And we got to think bigger than this little mud pond of the UK. There's a world out there where we have that kind of misrepresentation. So that's why I say that. No representation, for me, in my humble opinion, is better than misrepresentation.
And then there are some that would actually put forward a position to that, Prof. And I'll actually link this to something that you said, Dr. Ladi, in your interview, in your opinion piece, I beg your pardon. You referred to, at the very, very opening gambit, Gillian Joseph.
Yeah.
And you know that it was a moment of celebration almost for you and your mum. And you know, the point being is that, you know, yes, there are dominant representations that we feel are outdated, very, very much steeped in racist tropes and ideas. But do you feel that we have progressed because of the likes of Gillian Joseph? And I'd like to pose that to you, Dr. Ladi, because it was from your opinion piece. So,
Okay.
so just help us to understand what you meant by that, and if you could, I suppose, give it a complete or rounded account, because it doesn't just stop at the interpretation of Gillian Joseph. You went beyond that point. So I'd like you to, for those who haven't actually read the piece, be able to understand what you meant by that.
Yeah, I was watching TV with my mom, and so my mom is Nigerian, so she doesn't watch Sky a lot, but we saw Gillian Joseph as an anchor, not just a guest on the Sky News, whatever. She was an anchor, and my mom we were both excited and really happy about it. And the point in the piece was that, you know, there are some tangible moments of I don't know, emotional gratification from it. And that was one of the points I was trying to emphasize in that piece, that we should not confuse the emotional feel good we get from seeing, in this case, was quite positive, because one of the things I emphasize is that she's dark skinned, she's over 40, you know, she's a woman, and these are some of the things you might not easily see on TV. So, you know, but at the end of the day, those are still, you know, two very tiny points within a larger system. And I think it was something else I did emphasize on later in the piece, that at the end of the day, who is the net beneficiary? So even if we can count one or two positive stories, movies, representations, or whatever, who is the net beneficiary of all this positive, in in addition to the majority negative that Prof. Henry was referring to. And we cannot even just stop there. Let's even assume we change all this negative representations or misrepresentations into positive representations or actual realistic representations. It is still within that same media empire that I said is the other half of this violent system.
Yeah.
It's not enough to have black faces in the White House. So that's another thing. When I grew up in Nigeria, so most of my media actually came from the US. It was when I came to UK, I started consuming British media. But it's not enough to have black faces in those high places. And at the end of the day, I know for a fact Gillian Joseph is not writing the news. She's not picking the facts. She's literally reading the scripts. Like that's the whole concept of the news anchor. They literally just read what's in front of them. She's not a journalist, and I'm not putting down her job at all. I think she's a fantastic news anchor, but it's not enough to just have those faces in there. The decisions are being made off the screen. The editor, the producer, and all the other thousands of titles you can think of, the BBC chair and all that crazy stuff. So it's okay. We can enjoy that moment, but we can't get carried away by those token positive instances. I'm not sure if I've referenced the question properly.
Great. And I think what you say, the note that you finished on, it being tokenistic is ultimately fundamentally the point that we need to recognize. So I think another point that I will come back to is you actually referred to you consuming British media, being fed a diet of British media. And it's very important that we come back to that point when we look at activism and what it means to actually be producers, because that's a very important point that takes us to that place of revolutionizing and, I suppose, taking our destiny into our own hands and realizing the autonomy and the self-reliance that we want to see in order to achieve the gains that we need to make.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before you, Sister Esther and Brother Ladi, before you move on, Gillian Joseph was featured in one of those programs. I don't know if people saw it. It was something to do with black identity or something. But she was being interviewed with her daughter, and she actually lamented the fact that her daughter was actually ashamed of being black.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really interesting because she actually ended up crying, I think, when she was doing the interview. But then she realized the forces that are being marshaled against her. So imagine her daughter can see her in that position, but still, because it is narrow and so reduced, she cannot see it for the wider community who look like her. So I thought that was, I take my hat off to that sister, and in fact, I take my hat off to any brother and sister who can remain half sane in those mad environments. Because I've been interviewed by most of the mainstream networks and some of the cable ones, and when you go in there and you see what they have to put up with, it's a sea of white, literally. It's a sea of white in those places. So, yeah, I just thought I would throw that in, but absolutely, yeah.
Just on a very final note, just note to round up this particular section, I wanted to ask, is there any agency on society's part to take an alternative position to the messaging? And it's quite similar to a question that we've had in the chat. So, this idea of these images and these representations coming at us for us to consume, what agency or what autonomy do we have to take alternative meanings and alternative readings? Evidently, we have, because obviously you've been able to speak to that to some extent, Dr. Ladi, and also yourself, Prof. So Are you able to respond to that question?
Yeah, I'll just quickly go on that. I forgive me if I don't say this accurately, but the way I say it, a body in motion will remain in motion unless there's an external force acting on it. And if we don't continue to challenge those images, those representations, then they will be what they are, or more likely than not, they will get worse. So if we leave society, and I'm using that in the broadest term, to continue consuming this misrepresentations, nothing will change and more likely things will get worse. But we've never taken these things lying down. We've continuously challenged, and that is we are that external force, because at the end of the day, this system does not serve us. So we have to, act and understand that we need to be, outside it and then act on it. I know it's a very weird metaphor. But we're the external force trying to change what those representations are, trying to correct those misrepresentations. And I think that's where the sort of agency comes from, that we can act, and we do act independent of society as large. And I use society in the global sense, because racism is global. It's not just tied to the UK.
Yeah.
Very, very, very quickly, because we will move on to the next section. But Prof Les, I wanted to give you a chance to address that question also.
So hit me with a question again.
So it was just to ask what level of agency or do we have to reject these messages that are coming at us?
Well, I think for me, and it's one of the things that I've argued, I kind of used to argue it when I was DJing as Leslie Lyrics on Sound System. So from the early 80s, before I even knew what a PhD was, or even a bachelor's. And it is that as Africans, we don't just resist, we transcend. If we weren't transcendental people, we would not be here having this conversation. Because, and I've said this many times, when we talk about agency or autonomy, for my doctoral thesis, I looked at reggae sound system and dancehall culture. Because what I said is, within those spaces, they were autonomous. Okay, they were cathartic because they're about healing. And they were also the spaces where we were literally the judge, the jury, and the executioner. We determined what went on in those spaces. We determined what was being discussed in those spaces. And that's one of the reasons why I've said, for me, the most pro-Black, African-centered, resistant, and transcendental voice ever to come out of the UK came out of reggae music. Because, off air, I said I used to sell records at the back of my car. It's exactly the same attitude I have to writing as an academic. To me, being professor of whatever is just an extension of what I did as Leslie Lyrics on Sound Systems. It literally is. So I would bring my records to record companies, mainstream record companies, because I was signed to a couple of them. But when they said to me, the album should feature this, and I said to them, boy, I'm not going to chat slackness. I am definitely not going to chat this nihilistic stuff about killing people who look like me. And the other thing I said I'd never chat was rapid rapping, which was created in Lewisham by Peter King, so we can clear that one up. But the record companies were like, oh no, well, Les, if you do this, it will sell. And you know what I mean? People like, and I said to them, I ain't making records I can't play to my mother or my children. And my father was dead by then. So that's where I claim my autonomy. But why I say it was transcendental is because then what I did with my wonderful cousin, Tony Henry at the time, who's a singer, songwriter, musician, producer, we just did the records ourselves and used to sell them at the back of my car. And I have exactly the same attitude to publishing. I send books to mainstream publishers. And when they send me back, oh, well, you need to do this, you need to do that. My standard response to them is, okay, I'll get back to you. Get back to who? I write the things and publish them myself. Because I know what is in them is resistant and it's transcendental. Because I'm not just about, oh, woe is me, I'm an African, this is my lot. It's woe is me, I'm an African, this is my lot, and this is what we can do to transcend it. So I am not into just resistance. We're transcendental people, because if we weren't, I can tell you this. You look at what, especially European white supremacists, had planned for us as Africans. because we were not supposed to be here in the 21st century having these kind of global conversations. And I will challenge anyone to refute that, because I can bring them the evidence. And a very simple way to look at it is, and myself and brother Hakeem, we do these kind of community-based talks, and one of them we do about blacks in sci-fi. Why do you think black people were absent from science fiction until, what, I don't know, the 50s or 60s? You only write about the future, how you see it. We were not in it. We were not supposed to be in it. And that is an extension and representation of white supremacist thought and action. You can call it white privilege, you can call it whatever the hell you want. But to me, as an African person, you know, I said it in the interview, Chinua Achebe, one of my favorite authors, said, if as African people we don't tell our own stories, we will disappear. That's not resistant, that's transcendental. Because we cannot tell our stories as Africans without historicizing them. Because if we use that Atlantic moment from 1492 or whenever, when we became the chattel enslaved, what the hell history is that to pass on to anyone? So we have to predate that. So that's what I believe. The autonomy is ours. We just take it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which moves us on to our section 2, actually. So it's about representation as social progress. Mirror, mirror, are we a people possessed? So reflections on identity from the blueprint of Black Power. So Dr. Amos Wilson's lecture. So I just wanted to address this question to yourself, Professor Les. What should we take away?
Why can't Ladi go first? Why can't Dr. Ladi go
Ladi, everyone. What should we? So Ladi, what should we take away from the sudden surge of Black faces in the media? And I direct that to Ladi.
Yeah. I'll answer this question in 2 parts. So the first one, I mentioned it in the opinion piece, is that this is a token, but also a bribe, because the way I understand it is, 100 years ago, if we had asked the white man to put a black face in his magazine aimed at the majority of white people, who will laugh. He won't even punish this black person. Just like, you're joking, mate. But the fact that they feel obliged, or they feel they want to, for whatever profit-motivated reasons, to put those black faces there, it means that we're close, or we are at a critical stage where our demands can no longer be ignored. They cannot just laugh at it. They can't just ignore it and put it in the spam folder. So I think this then, to me, sounds like almost like a rallying cry. There is a chink somewhere in the armor. I don't know where it is, but we need to find it and continue to apply pressure there. So that was one. But also on the flip side of that, who has benefited the most from this multiple Black representation in TV? And one of my least favorite is the Kardashian family. Especially from the woman perspective, the female features, the shape of the bum, the lips, the nose, the figure 8 figure. These are things that the white supremacists typically, represented as bad, as negative, as the whore, and then the white angel that's slim and not seductive, and the black whore that's curvaceous and seductive. So for centuries, we carried this burden, or our women carry this burden of being over-sexualized. And then like that, when we start having more and more Black women on TV, the net beneficiary are the Kardashian family. And I use family specifically because anybody who follows popular media knows, it's now 2, likely 3 generations of Kardashian family benefiting off the specific image. And it's not just the physical appearance. If you go into it as well, many of them have stolen, because they're into fashion as well, they've stolen ideas from up-and-coming Black entrepreneurs. They've realized it's not enough to sell the body of a Black woman. They need to sell the designs and the ideas as well. So all those, the increase the substantial increase in Black representation in media is sort of two-sided. And I think we need to hold both on simultaneously as we march forward.
Yeah, that's great. So I suppose what you're saying is cultural appropriation, basically, is what is, yeah. So I'd also like to direct this question to Professor Les. So in the Dr. Amos's lecture, Dr. Amos suggests that in the main, we are a people possessed by the oppressor's spirit, so that we have no self-will and therefore no self-determination. What is your assessment of his position? So I will direct that to Professor Les.
Well, to me, Amos N. Wilson, who was one of my favorite authors as well, you know, to me was being provocative. And when I say being provocative, it is because if everything that you see around you are if all that you see around you are these representations of white, so everything that is good, virtuous, and pure is white. And I don't know if people are familiar with Dr. Martin Luther King, who's another person who's been totally misrepresented out there. But the very last speech he gave, the day before he was killed, was on Black is Beautiful. I don't know if people have ever seen that. It's online. Go and look at it. One of the things that he said was he was the person, to my knowledge, who first read out from a dictionary those definitions of black and white. So, you know, black was everything negative, dark, evil, blah, 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 and white was good, virtuous, pure. Now, for me, one of the things what Amos N. Wilson was trying to get us to do, because he was a psychologist, is to think about those relationships. So if you think about it like this, why is it that as peoples of African ancestry, and you know, Dr. Ladi, Brother Ladi, just touched on it, why is it that we will worship white people who are in the image of us, but we don't want to worship ourselves? Because to me, that's really interesting. So for instance, I know when I was a youth, when I was younger, a lot of Black girls would hide their bottoms. Literally, you talk to people of my generation, they'll tell you, you know, they would hide their bottoms because the society told them their bottoms are too big. People used to ask them, are they false? Are they fake? You know, and I know that not all Black women, in anthropology, we call it stereotypica, the shape, and gluteus maximus, I think is big butty or whatever we want to call it, I don't know, whatever. But they used to hide it because aesthetically, they didn't think they fit into that type. Okay. So for me, one of the things what Amos N. Wilson was trying to get us to think about in that sense was, why is it that we cannot see this beauty, this aesthetic worth in ourselves as peoples of African ancestry? But if it's presented through the white world, all of a sudden we'll embrace it. I can give you examples. Bo Derek in a film called 10, all of a sudden, she invented plaiting. You don't have to speak to people who are around in the 70s or 80s. She invented plaiting. The Kardashians, I'll be honest with you, I thought they were something out of Star Trek until one of my students told me they were this whatever. Because I just don't really watch those kind of things. But I find it really interesting because one of the courses I teach on media and representation, one of my students did their presentation on the Kardashians. And they showed me this picture. And when I looked at it, and I said, boy, she kind of look, yeah, she looked good. And they said, well, it's all false. But the fact is now, why is it that now a lot of Black women, African women, women of African ancestry, all of a sudden, yeah, it's nice to be curvaceous to the point where some of them want to go and get those false implants or whatever it is. Whereas before, they would have resisted that. So to me, it's a psychological thing. But if you want, for me, a more pragmatic example about how, as Africans, things that were, and I know other members of the human family do things like this, but just think about a simple thing like wrapping your baby around your stomach or your back so you can either move around the house, walk around the house, or work. When we were youths, and you can speak to any one of my generation and older, they will tell you, when we were youths, white people used to say that was a sign of Africans being savage. How can you tie your child around your stomach or tie your child around your back? What happened about 20 years ago? Europeans created these things, cradles, to put their children on their front and on their back. Because I pointed this out to people and I said, isn't it interesting that that was a mark of savagery, but now it's a mark of civilization?
Yeah.
What happens the day when somebody teaches them how to tie the baby on them? Those firms will go out of business. But you see, this is what happens. As Africans, what we bring aesthetically to the table is totally condemned until some white person. That's why I'll be honest with you. Look, I'll tell you something straight, yeah. As a reggae performer, I've said this, and I don't care. You could get a rapper like Eminem, I don't care what his name is. No white person who speaks to black culture as a performer, I will bury all of them lyrically, every single one of them, because it comes out of us. And I'm not saying that to be braggadocious or whatever. I'm saying because the first thing I'm going to remind them is this spoke to people who look like you for what you did to us.
So if we are a people possessed by the oppressive spirit, what does the process of exorcism look like practically?
Well, I've got a lyric, yeah. I've got a lyric called Scissors and Kong, yeah. And it's about Rastafari, what Rastafari taught me about loving myself as an African. And in the lyric, at the end of the lyric, I'm talking about, you know, this whole Jesus, you know, the white Jesus who turned off black head a bow is a family portrait from Michelangelo, commissioned by the Pope so that Rome could have ruled them, take Christ as a tool to take the people turn fool. If you have a savior where you're not favor, take him off the wall and look in the mirror. That's your salvation as an African person. Look in the mirror for your salvation.
Yeah, no, that sounds, yeah, that's so true. I'd like to also direct that as well to Ladi. So I'd say again, if we are possessed by the oppressive spirit, what does the process of exorcism look like practically? And
yeah, I think I'll just leave it at where Prof Les stopped, because I'm not familiar with Dr. Amos's work really. I did look up some of his stuff, but I didn't delve in enough to properly digest it.
So no, that's fair enough. But I guess what I meant, I feel like, what is the solution to the situation as it is now? So there has been this surge of black faces in the media, but how do we go about being the producers now of our own representation? How do we try to break down the stereotypes, the misrepresentations, or do we just say, do you know what, let's start again? We don't need you. We're gonna, what do you think? How do we?
Yeah, I think generally there isn't a silver bullet. So let those who want to integrate and what's the word? When you want to improve a system from inside, those who want to improve it from inside, yeah, let them do their thing. But those who want a more radical approach, it would have to be independent media, and that's one of the benefits of social media. I follow so many beautiful artists, both photographers, musicians, rappers. I remember when I first came to UK, I got introduced to grime from a kid in London on YouTube, and I still only get grime from YouTube. No matter how much radio I listen to, I can't get grime. So one of the advantages of social media is that we can, create our own representation that doesn't need further deconstruction. It's just real, it's raw. This is who I am. This is who you are, and that kind of thing. But at the same time, social media, we cannot then rely wholesomely on social media. If you look at some places like Tumblr and OnlyFans, even Pornhub, just like that, all that content would disappear. If Twitter suddenly decides, you know what, it's no longer profitable to allow Black people to express themselves properly, they'll take it off, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry, Dr. Ladi, that actually leads us on to the next section, just so that you can actually continue with that point within a very clear frame of reference for all the participants. Our next section, section 3, looks at negotiating the representation. So understanding the power of collective resistance, rejection, and the alternative narrative. So to your point then, I'll take up the first question, which is, what role should Black media professionals take in informing the dominant narrative of the Black identity?
Yeah.
Should they be demanding a seat at the table or building their own?
Yeah. I try to avoid binary questions where you that this or that. Obviously, again, the Black is diverse. People, there's everybody needs to be playing their part, but then that means we cannot all be playing the same part. So those who want to reform, yes, reform was what I was looking for. So those who want to reform the image is already in the white space can do that. But they always need to remember that that is all they're doing. They are reforming an idea that the white space is not created for Blackness. It was created to kill Blackness, not to elevate it. It's kind of exists in that space. So let them continue reforming as long as they want, no problems. But on the other side as well, is creating that those representations outside mainstream media, as Les has mentioned, Professor Les has mentioned multiple times, self-publications, whether it's music or books, or even on my side, actually was a full-time photographer in Nigeria, but we spent more time on Photoshop than we did on taking pictures. And what were we doing in Photoshop? We're removing blemishes, we're lightening people's skin, we're lightening people's hair. Even in Nigeria, there's Black country, white supremacy is still there. So I literally quit as a full-time photographer because it was just not what I was seeing. So in terms of the actual Black professionals as well, so even if you consider yourself a radical and in your mind you're creating real Black content, one thing I'm starting to realize, and I think Spike Lee might be guilty of this, is that over time you will run out of material for yourself. So you were, in my opinion, I'm trying to create a representation of myself. Okay, fine, I've taken all the pictures of myself. What's next? Then I have to make sure I'm in deep conversation with my Black collective. Okay, absolutely. What is within the Black community that needs to be told? Okay, fine, at the beginning of my career, I was hungry, I was angry, I've said all the things that I could say. Okay, what next? Now it's not, I would recommend start looking inwards. Okay, what about you do you want to say as a Black producer? But then after that, once you've mastered your craft, you then have to look outside, what in your immediate Black community, or you can even travel, people do that, travel documentary. What's in the Black community that needs to be told? And oftentimes you don't even need to ask, just spend 10, 20 minutes talking to other Black people. I think you hinted at divergence. Interview. Trust me, something will pop out. I'll leave that there.
Lovely, thank you. And because of time, Dr. Les, Prof. Les, I'll direct that to you as well.
To me, it's kind of easy, and it goes back to what's the sister's name? Sherelle. Is it Sherelle? Yeah. To me, it's easy. I'll be honest with you. I don't care what the white world wants to do and what they want to produce. I don't waste my energy on what they want to do or what they want to produce. To me, we just do our own, and we just keep feeding it and putting it out there. Because at the end of the day, what people want, in my humble opinion, is balance. What Europeans, white supremacists, if we want to call them white racists, they are afraid of balance because they have created a very lopsided, imbalanced field. That's what they've done. Malcolm X said it when he said, they will never create a level playing field because then it'll be even Steven. So to me, what we do is we don't waste all our time and energy worrying about, oh, white people are doing this and white people are doing that. We know they're doing this. We know they're doing that. We know why they're doing it. You know, brother, Dr. Ladi, you nailed it. It's violence. It's that kind of soft power that can destroy people and they don't even know that they're being destroyed. These images, these misrepresentations, you know, look at the way they advertise so-called blackness on TV. You know, look at it. Look at how you see the mixed racy looking girl with the white man, or the mixed racy looking man with the white woman. All these kinds of constant representations. Well, to me, it's quite simple. We just do what we believe represents us in our own small way, and we just keep putting that out. That's what we need to do, to me, as a collective, as Africans, because not everybody's going to have the same consciousness. Not everybody's going to see the situation in the same way. You know, we all invest in different things aesthetically, culturally. I think, I can't remember if I said it, you know, Sister Esther, when you interviewed me, but my world is 99.9% black by choice. It always has been. So I can't go around and say, boy, mate, I can't take them people there, so whatever. Because I will invariably be talking about people who look like me, because they're the people I surround myself with. But I'm not confused to believe we're the only members of the human family who have those foibles and failings. So if we know that's the case, and we know the white world only want to focus on the pejorative, the negative, you know, the African, the savage, the semi-human, the wanting to be white, which are some of the things that Amos N. Wilson tackled in that book, and the other one about, oh man, I can't remember, black on black violence, when he was looking at, you know, black on black violence in the context of America. You know, it's what the Nation of Islam said, you know, Elijah Muhammad said it. It's the hate that hate made. So if all you see are these representations of you as a hateful, spiteful, nihilistic, anti-human person, and you understand why those representations are there, why they're being funded, why they're being, you know, perpetuated, then all you need to do is say, well, hold on a second, most of the black people I know aren't like that. So let's have some stuff about us then, and forget them. Because I'll tell you something, last thing, very quickly about the white world. If they think they can make money out of it, they will jump on the bandwagon, and that's when we need to fear. Because from about 1988 to 1991, the only rap music that was being sold was the pro-black Bondong Babylon, hate white people music that was coming out of Public Enemy, Stetson Sonic, X-Clan, KRS-One, you name them. LL Cool J was starving with his love music. And I'm not saying that to disrespect our brother, but what I'm saying is the white world invested heavily in pro-black African-centered music, and then they dropped them and took up people like P. Diddy. So if we start to put our own product, we want to mind we don't get appropriated by these people.
So just sort of following on from that point, actually, so where are the current spaces to access the alternative narrative? Like where?
Right here. Right here.
And I mean, any other sort of, like, just for our sort of participants, where can we sort of access these alternative narratives in various spaces? Like where would you suggest, just for the benefit of our participants?
Well, to me, you've got, you know, wonderful resources right across the UK, you know, pro-black African-centered people with the Ubuntu, I am because we are, therefore I am, or I am we spirit. You know, when we ran our own little company, Newbie Unlimited Learning by Choice, we created Black Friday, Black Liberation African Knowledge Fridays. We created it in 2006 to fight what we called the Wilberforce. You know, this old William Wilberforce came and freed all Africans, whatever. But we created that, and what we did was we focused on our people who are based in the UK. That's what we did. So it's community spaces. It's, you know, like you're the Black Knowledge Society. Let's say when we get back to so-called normal and we can have gatherings, if you say, right, we want to have this kind of discussion with a live panel, you get a little community center or a hall, and you put it on. If you get 5 people, fine. If you get 100 people, fine. Because the people who are there are the ones who should be there.
Right.
But to me, because we've got this tool, and I love, the point that, again, what Dr. Ladi said is, if these people who control the mainstream media tomorrow say, right, no more Twitter, no more YouTube, no more whatever, it's gone. But guess what? We will still find ways around that, because their dominance is being broken. And for whatever reason we're in this situation now, this, whether you call it pandemic, COVID or COVID, what it has done is it has opened up a world of possibilities. Since COVID, I've had the pleasure of, reasoning with Aboriginal Australian brothers and sisters about a wonderful film that they made. Without COVID, that wouldn't have happened. Do you understand what I'm saying? It would never have been a live interview with whatever time it is in the UK there. So to me, what we really need to do is we need to kind of seize these moments and just think about how can we create these alternative, autonomous public arenas. And what you do to get around all this YouTube stuff is exactly what you all are doing now. You record them and disseminate. I've always said, document, discuss, disseminate. I've said it from day one. Document, discuss, disseminate. Because that's what we do.
Thank you so much, Prof. And on that note, I'd also like to add that, another few resources that I'm aware of. If you know of any, put them in the chat. But I'm also familiar with an alternative social media platform called Black Chat that has recently, I think it's in its second wave. It's come back. So it's come back as a platform that's being used for our good, for our progress. And then also Professor Les has his own platform as well called Out of View, which is also a very, very useful platform to engage with. So there are resources out there. But one thing that I wanted us to, before we move on to the Q&A, I think it's important that, we're talking about becoming producers, becoming, having the autonomy and really the agency to move ourselves forward, self-reliance ultimately. But I think it's very important to ask this question. And the question is, give us some basic ideas on how we as people begin to organize and operate as community activists. Because you remember, Prof, in the interview that you gave, I'd mentioned to you that within our community, there seems to be this disconnect with the word activism, that it seems to have almost a privileged sort of position or notion within itself. And we're just trying to level it out so that it's accessible and we sort of democratize it so that everyone realizes what activism in its purest sense looks like. So if you could very quickly speak to that. And part of that question is also understanding where the gaps are within our community in terms of, the strategic areas of community development that are missing at the moment, that are actually precluding us from moving forward. So it's a bit of a double-ended question, that one.
Well, to me, that's a whole discussion on its own.
Yeah.
But I think the simplest answer is, and I don't really like these activist or radical labels. I really don't like them because to me, and I know what you mean about the elitist thing, and this all comes down oftentimes to charismatic leadership, and then this person, whatever. To me, it's kind of simple. It's those of us who are, let's say, those of us who are conscious, as in awake and aware, and we know that as peoples of African ancestry, there are certain things that militate against us as soon as we leave the house, as soon as we get up every morning. So to me, what we do is we think about ways that we can actively resist and actively transcend. Because if you're thinking about the generations coming behind you, resistance isn't enough. So the activism has to be pragmatic in that sense. So it has to be informed and it has to have an idea of where you're going to go. Okay. So to me, one of the things that we do then is we work with like-minded people. And I said it in the interview with you. If I do a talk and a brother or sister says to me, yeah, Brother Les, we need to do blah, blah, blah. And I'll say to them, well, maybe that's your works. That's the space you need to be active in. Find a few like-minded people and make something work. But I agree with you. All of the, that's why I am just not into none of this charismatic leaders and blah, blah, blah. I think we need leadership and not leaders per se. Leadership is different. And it's one of the examples I gave you in the interview when I spoke about, you know, the wonderful Lucian Black Father Support Group. You know, one of the brothers in there, Brother Patrick Augustus, who wrote the Baby Father books, who is a brilliant musician, etc. One of the things that he was doing was running a school in the Gambia. When we created the Lucian Black Father Support Group, we took over running that, built another school and a health center. Now that Lucian Black Father Support Group can run without a leader because it has leadership. And for me, if we're going to talk about being active, we need to separate what, you know, the point that you, for me, a very excellent point, was we need to separate it from these people who see themselves as the most active, the paragons or paradigms of what community activism is. And to me, that's not what it is. It's collective. It has to be a collective endeavor and effort where we can all be active. You know, Brother Ladi does photography, that's fine. You know, you will have your strengths. The other sisters will have their strengths. Why can we not pool those resources to create something? That to me is what community activism is. So I don't get confused with a lot of these charismatic leaders who after time it's just massaging their egos.
Absolutely. Well, this could go on, and for me, I think we've covered quite a lot here. I think we absolutely must move on because the chat has a number of questions that I don't think we can afford to neglect. So if we may thank you both, Professor Les and Dr. Ladi.
Give thanks, sis. Give thanks.
For your contributions. It's been immense. It's been impactful. And now we'd like to open up the Q&A. So shall we ask if anybody has any questions, just as a reminder that you want to ask directly, please do indicate by using the hand raising tool, and we'll be able to get your questions directly to our panelists. Otherwise, we will proceed with, okay, I see one hand up. Amani, I'm going to come to you, and thereafter we'll go into the chat box. Anybody else that wants to ask a question directly, you're more than welcome to put your hand up, and we'll get to you. So Amani, if you wanted to go ahead.
Yeah, greetings everyone, good evening.
Yeah, greetings.
Yes, Prof, what's happening, man?
Well, I'm there.
Good.
Yeah.
So I've got a question for the panel. You know, the space that I occupy and I have interest in is the space that involves those that have high profile platforms and celebrities, if you want to call them that, people that are highly valuable to their community but may not necessarily engage in community discussions and activities. How can we get them involved in conversations like this?
Well, I'm going to kind of cheat here because that's exactly what Brother Amani does. So maybe you should give us an example of how you do it.
I'm usually quite hesitant with that approach because I feel if they were interested, they would be reaching out to you, not the other way around. And I have a terrible example of that. It was Jay-Z and Colin Kaepernick. You know, Colin Kaepernick with his kneeling and getting blackballed and all of that stuff. And Jay-Z, you know, got involved. I don't know who contacted who, but all of a sudden Jay-Z hijacked it and then turned into a profit-making endeavor, and, you know, completely detached from what Colin Kaepernick was, you know, aiming for. And I can't remember, he got millions, Jay-Z, from that deal. Jay-Z, you know, a black man, and Colin, I think, is mixed race. So I'm quite hesitant to approach, you know, this big shot, this celebrities, this blah, blah, blah. More often than not, they have capital to protect. So I'm not answering your question, I'm aware, but what I would say is, you know, if you do approach them, always have at the back of your mind that, you know, they will, more likely than not, they will protect their capital first.
Yeah.
And more likely than not, if they were interested, they will find you.
So let's say hypothetically someone or a group of people have come into the conversation and say, we're interested, we want to do something. Now that they're at the table, what do you do?
Yeah, well, it's now, again, now we're talking hypotheticals, but it's about, okay, this is my ideology. You decide.
Not necessarily.
Sorry?
Not necessarily hypothetical.
Well, put your ideology in front of them. This is who I am. This is where we're going.
Yeah.
And then if you do have spaces for them to slot into, let them slot themselves in. But if you don't know where they should slot in, ask them, okay, this is what we're doing. Where do you think you fit in? But always, the most important thing I'm trying to handle is don't let them hijack it. Because if they hijack it, you can't get it back. They have 5 million followers. You know, no one's going to listen to you, whatever platform you have. So I think it's more or less, you know, making sure the ideology and the aims and objectives you're set out are crystal clear, and they fit into your, you know, movement, your plan, your platform, and not the other way around.
Yeah, and to add to that, you know, to everyone who's listening and to Brother Amani, you know what Dr. Ladi said. I've got, you know, off air we could have a conversation where I could actually name names, but I've been in situations like that. For instance, I was approached by brother and sister from the Nation of Islam, Brother Adate, Sister Francesca Mohammed, and there's a sister called Maxine. She's gonna kill me because I'm not good with names. Wonderful sister who comes from over North London, and we created something called the National Independent Education Coalition. And basically, when we set it up, there were 3 things we wanted to do. We wanted to have a conference where we would get people like Prof. Gus John and other people in education to speak. We would create an online resource, and we would create another resource that was interactive that would be global. And we did all of those 3 things. But let's say in the year that we were planning those 3 things, we had loads of people come in, and they would say, right, we can do this, this, and this. And we said to them, no, this is the agenda. And every single one of them backed out. And some of them were moneyed, and they backed out. And the reason why they backed out was because we said to them, no, this is what we're doing, and this is what we intend to do. But they came in with their own agendas because they either had name or position or whatever it is. And we said, no, we rejected them. So I think that's, you know, the point that, the salient point for me is what is their involvement? Because I love what, you know, Brother Ladi said. It's about, oftentimes it's their capital investment. I know so-called big star performers who I grew up with, who when I was running Family Health ISIS, I managed it for a year, one of the oldest African Caribbean mental health charities. It's defunct now. But in, I think it was 2006 or 2007, we were putting on a big event for the clients. And I'm talking about major global phenomena, musicians that I grew up with. And I said to them, can you come and do this for the community? And they put me on the bloody phone to their agent. And I'm like, what the hell is this? You know, this is for us. You're from this community. But, you know, and what I realize is it's exactly what you know, Dr. Ladi said. Oftentimes it's their capital is the most important thing. It's a bit like Live Aid and Band Aid. Every single musician who was a party to that, their career went through the roof. They were resurrected, many of them. A lot of them were half dead in the pop world. So I think we need to be very careful about that relationship. But yeah, so if everyone knows how we could do it, yeah.
Yeah, Prof, we'll touch base, man. Don't worry.
I'm gonna very, very swiftly and politely look to move on.
Just but we can talk about this off air, brother Amani. Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to Darren, Brian. Darren, if you'd like to ask your question.
Thanks, sis. Bliss up to Professor Les and Dr. Ladi. Always nice to see you both. Dr. Les, I look to see you doing more of those presentations alongside BHS. You know, the infamous couple, being sister Charmaine and brother Mark Simpson. Always brilliant to work with them. But yeah, it's very worrying. Or do you find it worrying that we still have a lot of our people not realizing the divinity in themselves, where they just have to do something, join something, rather than always keep looking for a black savior? Yeah. We've passed that now. Are you finding that people still are understanding we have to do a little bit even for ourselves?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant point. And it goes back to what I said about we don't need those charismatic leaders anymore. And that for me goes back to, you know, the question that Sister Esther asked about activism. You know, we can all be active in our own ways, you know. You know, as them say in Jamaica, 1-1 cork a full basket. You don't fill a basket immediately. It's 1-1. And to me, that's what we need to do. But I do think we're still in many ways blighted as peoples of African ancestry. And whether it is through that Judeo-Christian sensibility that we're always looking for an external savior. But yeah, oftentimes, you know, people have venerated me in those ways. And when I tell them one and two things about me, and especially my past, you know, they soon take me off that pedestal because I don't want to be on it in the first place, you know. But at the end of the day, it's a brilliant point, Brother Darren, because oftentimes we are blighted and we're looking for these charismatic leaders or saviors. And I remember, you know, Prof. Gus John said it beautifully years ago. We got to be wary of these self-appointed, self-anointed leaders. You know, Prof. Gus John said that years ago. And I think it is one of the dangers. But, you know, I used to say this thing and I used to get castigated for it until I was at a talk where Dr. Joy DeGruy was presenting a post-traumatic slave syndrome. It was in Houston somewhere. And, you know, our wonderful sister, Esther Stanford Zose, was there. And Esther always used to have a go at me when I used to say to her, you know what, sis, some of us ain't going to make it. And I'm not being horrible, but let's put the time and energy into the ones we think will. And she used to say to me, oh, you know, you're cold and blah, blah, blah. And then Dr. Joy DeGruy said exactly the same thing. She said, I got to tell you all something. Some of you ain't going to make it. So work with the ones who we think we can.
Thank you for that, brother. Really
Thank you, Brother Dan, for that question. Again, moving swiftly on. There is a question here. So has decades of misrepresentation in charities gotten better? We need our own platforms. Can we have examples of where to find them?
Yeah, well, I can say there's a few that come to mind. You've got Black History Studies, you've got Black History Walks, you've got, what do they call it? Black Cultural Archives, or more importantly, look at the work of Brother Pablo. You know, there are so many organizations. I just think that the one thing that perhaps as, you know, Africans, peoples of African ancestry, we could do is network a little bit more keenly. You know, we've got a wonderful sister who's online called Rihole Bitata, who I did one of my interview with. You know, I've known this sister for a long time and she's always been championing, you know, Black involvement in the STEM sciences. She's always done that. So to me, if we can find a way to maybe network more efficiently, then I think that will alleviate many of the concerns and so-called problems that we face, because people will have recognized resources. But I'll be honest with you, one of the things what I don't like is why do we have to prefix it with Black? And I'm not talking about you as the Black Knowledge Society, because to me, that's different, it's purposeful, and it serves a particular thing. But why Black Chat? Why not just chat? Because if you think you're only going to rely on Black people to make you sustainable, you're living in cloud cuckoo land, especially when we think about the amount of mixed relationships there are in the UK and on this planet. So to me, we just need maybe the people who are versed and have expertise in that kind of communication, you know, the networking. Maybe we need a little bit more of that, because I know usually when people say to me, oh, I'd really like to look into this, I might say to them, well, this person does that. Or people who come to me and say they're having major problems with their children, I send them to Brother Andrew Mohammed, you know, West Side Young Leaders Academy, which came out of East Side Young Leaders Academy. Do you see what I mean? We've got, you know, I've always said, you know, that as peoples of African ancestry, for every problem, so-called problem we face, all the solutions lie within. Every single one is there. Every
Absolutely.
single one is within. We just have to find them sometimes.
And on that note, I want to very, very quickly capture one more question before we summarize and close the meeting. So I would ask Professor Les to expand on his position on transcending and not just resisting. The Black Supplementary School movement is a fine example of that, as is the various youth movements that grew out of our Black youth work tradition. How can we make sure we capture the transcending that we have been about for the last 5 decades at least?
Right, to me, the supplementary thing is interesting, because supplement means you add on to. It's not central.
Yeah.
So the first thing we need to do, you know, one of the things we were trying to do with the National Independent Education Coalition was we wanted to create a school. And it would have been a school, and it's really interesting when people say, you know, Black school or Black teachers. And to me, it is important. You know, I know that, for instance, when I go to Jamaica, one of my cousins teaches in a school, so I volunteer usually if I go out there. So if I'm in Jamaica for a week, I'll go to the school a couple of days and just work with the children. And you know why? Because I want them to know that there are people in England who look like them, who lecture and teach at university or whatever, but can still reason with them in a way that they can appreciate. So to me, what we need is, we need more, like if we're saying independent schools, let's not have a supplementary school. Let's have some independent schools, independent institutions.
Yeah.
And that is why one of my pet hates, and I'll say it here, and I've said it for years, is when you get people saying they want to raise £6 million to build a statue, or £1 million to pull an anchor out of the ocean. You know, when they were going to have the so-called slave memorial in Hyde Park, I think it was, they invited me to those meetings, you know. Do you know, loads of times I get invited to those meetings, but when I sit in a meeting and I say to them, why don't we raise 6 million and create an educational institute and put the name or your little statue as a plaque on the front of the building, create an educational institution where we teach people about those histories. Well, they disinvite me from those groups all the time. And I always say to them, look, William, Alistair, Anthony, Henry is not an African name. And I know I'm an African person. So I have the greatest memorial that something was done to me and people who look like me, and it is still impacting me now, which is why I'm walking around with these very European names. And I'll show you this. My friend bought this for me. Look at that. My favorite quote. See that? Got this from my Crimbo present from one of my best friends. Marcus Garvey. A people without knowledge of their history is like a tree without roots. And to me, it's really as simple as that. We need educational institutions. So when you see people saying they want 6 million to build this, say to them, why can't, you know, 6 million will build a nice educational institute. And you could even have volunteers going in there to teach what we know people need to know to create that balance. Really simple to me.
And I think that's a very, very great note to end on, a very powerful note to end on. And in rounding up very quickly, I'd like to thank you both once again. So thank you to yourself, Professor Les, and to yourself, Dr. Ladi. What we normally do, as is our custom, is just to look at some of the action points that have come out today, just to really encourage this community that we have here to essentially just go forth and actually start to put these things into practice. So the first action point being that you know, we need to think bigger than our doorstep, in helping to get rid of the personal and social prejudices that the media spot out at us. We need to be producers and in charge of our own destiny. I think this is probably the most key takeaway. And in charge of our own destiny, regardless of thoughts and stereotypes. We need to exercise those demons, as our dear Dr. Amos Wilson expounds in that particular. And I would encourage you, if possible, I'll see if I can find a link, but I would encourage anyone that's on this platform to look at that YouTube video. It's 2 hours, but it's 2 hours.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Life. It's 2 hours, but it will transform you. Okay, so basically being producers and in charge of our own destiny, and being and begin implementing our truths of the Black community, being transcendental, being standing firm, rooted in our individual truths, and eradicating negative representations. So countering those narratives with narratives that we actually develop ourselves. Being pragmatic and practical in our ways of living, understanding our identity as Black people, rather than following theoretical waves and stigmas and ideologies. Rejecting societal oppressors and creating our own representations as well. I think the final few points, so document, discuss, disseminate our messages, and have leadership rather than leaders. So being active, we ourselves actually being the community activists, whilst we resist these labels, recognizing that it is very, very simple and very accessible. And the question of you identifying a gap and looking to fill that gap within the community. So start your own movements. Don't look for others. Don't look for Black saviors. There are no Black saviors. We have all the answers that lie within. And Professor Les, I say exactly the same thing. So I completely resonate with the fact that we have all the solutions.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And network more efficiently, you know, network with a bit more sort of strategic reasoning and consideration in terms of how you're doing it. So those are the points. And I will like to, at this point, hand over to Sherelle, just so that we can have our sort of rounding off statements and close.
Yes, so I'd like to thank our esteemed guest panelists, Professor Les Henry and Dr. Ladi Fagbola. We thank you for all participating in our meeting today. And please follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel. All those details should be in the chat box. So once again, if you'd like to follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all our details, and also the guest panelist details are also there in the chat. And we thank you very much.
If you do want a copy of the edition as well, guys, just let us know. I'm sorry to interrupt you there, Sherelle, but please let us know if you want a copy of issue 4.
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you again to both the team of TBKS and also everybody who's attended, and also it's been a massive, massive privilege sharing a panel with Professor Les. It's been fantastic. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and give thanks to you, Dr. Ladi. We'll definitely have to get in touch and have a little chin wag. And, you know, to the wonderful, you know, the Black Knowledge Society, just keep the faith, keep up the works. And, you know, if there's anything you think I can do, you just holler. And as we say in Jamaica, what good. And as Marimba Annie said, who wrote the wonderful book, Yurugu, Prof. Marimba Annie, white people only have the power over us because we continue to give it to them. Yeah.
What a fine note to end on. What a fine note to end on.
We give thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your participation and for your questions. And apologies that we didn't get to all of them, but hopefully the ones that we did get to have been valuable for you. And that ends our session. Thank you very much, everyone.